previous section. And we can see here, personal experience is counted for an awful lot. Whether that's IT C-suite, quite high, against the non-IT C-suite, i.e. IT managers, and that's how we're differentiated. CTO versus IT manager. Now on this slide, the one thing that really stood out to me was blogs. Now, I've been a cynic of blogs, I'll be honest. Until now, I thought, okay, I can understand why you do that. I can't really see the broader value. Here is a clear example that if you're trying to reach the IT C-suite, they do count for something. And I found that really quite enlightening, not something I was expecting to see. Interestingly enough, and when you break it down by country, and we'll do that in a little while, it counts for even more elsewhere in the world. So as we mentioned, blogs are really important. AR, I'm going to continue to bang on about, is incredibly important. So let's leave that aside for a second. But blogs are much more important than I think anyone would have anticipated. In the US, they count for about 38% of influence of information. In Canada, about 40%, and in China, 48%. So I think we're starting to see a trend that blogs are making a real difference. And in fact, if you look at Sun Microsystems, John Schwartz has one of the most widely read blogs around. He gets hundreds of thousands of people reading it, and not just employees either. He has huge influence on the industry. And for me, this is a bit of a wake-up call. It's time, perhaps, to really look at blogs as a serious communication channel. Just some things here I'd split out in terms of how they differ SMB to enterprise, because there is a little differential. When it comes to blogs, 32% said that they thought it was an important influence of information versus 17% in enterprises. So depending on your business and who you're trying to reach, blogs could be even more critical for you. Now I think that speaks to the fact that if you're an SMB and you're looking to buy new technology, you're going to go online and type in Google and you're going to check out the first 10 results that come back. You don't have an awful lot of time, that's probably the way you're going to go. So I think it speaks to the fact they have less time and perhaps less technical information at their disposal. The other thing I'll point out is financial analyst reports. I don't think it will come as a huge surprise when I tell you that enterprises found them far more important than SMBs did. I don't think that comes as a great shock to anybody. Splitting those out by IT C-suites versus non-IT C-suites, major business publication articles are going to be really important. That is aside from industry analyst reports. Again, we'll break this down in a bit more detail so you can see exactly how and what influences those people. Before I spend too much time digging into the analysts, just want to give you a couple of numbers. We asked people who they regularly subscribe to. Number one was Gartner. I don't think that would be a surprise. But exactly the same number, 17%, also subscribed to Forrester. Next in line, Data Monitor at 14%, and Juniper at 10%. And then a whole range of others, Butler and so on, came in around 8%, 7%, somewhere around about that. And if you wish, I can break those numbers down for you. Something of a surprise to me, I just assumed Gartner would be leagues ahead of everybody else. It's clearly not the case. And when you break it down by C-suite versus non-C-suite, Gartner has huge influence among the non-C-suites. 22% of them regularly subscribe to Gartner. Amongst Forrester subscribers, though, the vast majority seem to be C-suite. So it seems that when a CTO wants to get information about the market and is using an analyst, most of them are going to Forrester. Something of a surprise to me, and we can tackle that a bit more later on. Now we asked people to split out how they use analysts. Verbal consultations, i.e. face-to-face meetings, and the published reports. There's not a huge variation here, but a couple of things that I'll point out. Verbal consultations seem to be more about deciding which vendors to invite to the final pitch stage, whereas the published reports are applied a little later in the decision-making process. It's about finalising the purchase decision. Again, I thought that was slightly odd. But one thing that really stood out for me here is the amount of time that is spent, the amount of people who use analysts for justifying the expenditure And I don't think as PR people, we always think about that. Because we think, well, okay, analysts will help when they want to narrow down the short list, or when we're trying to get to a final pitch list, or making the final decision. But actually, the CTOs and their IT managers need a hand in going to the board or to their boss to say, here is why we need to buy this technology. And the analysts seem to be having a major impact on that. Which are most credible? Gartner seems to be most credible as the #1 source, but interestingly, Forrester is a backup a lot of the time. Those people at Forrester are kind of smiling. I think you thought that might be happening, correct? And to me, that's a little bit of a surprise that Gartner, okay, would stand out, but that he wouldn't be a second source as well. So those who might go to Forrester aren't necessarily going to Gartner as a second source. So if we split it out amongst C-suites, i.e. the entire board, and the IT managers, well, it's quite clear what I said at the start. That Gartner has major influence on the IT managers, and Forrester has the influence on the board. For those of you that go to events, for those of you that run events, I would have expected Gartner Spring Symposium and the Fall Symposium to be very high up the list. It's not. It's really not. So if you are advising internally on which events to go to and which to avoid like the plague, here is a clear way to do that. So I think if we're trying to summarise about industry analysts, they are incredibly important and I think will only gain importance. But what I hadn't appreciated, and it's something for all of us to wrap our heads around, is that analysts can be used at all stages in the purchase decision, even in figuring out what that decision is going to be, right at the very start. As well as at the final end, who do we pick? Which technology do we really want? Media, the love of our life. Now, the question we asked here of the C-suite, of the IT C-suite, of the senior IT managers is, tell us which media are a source of technology or technology industry information. It's not what they necessarily read to get the sport.